Hello and welcome to episode 11 of Self-Discovery. Today I want to talk about perfectionism, and the title is Perfectionism Isn't Cool Anymore. And I say that as much to myself as anyone else. Before I dive into the content, I do want to say that this podcast comes out every Monday at 6 a.m. So be sure to subscribe and please leave a review. And if you have any questions that you want me to submit, or that you want to submit that you want me to then answer in the podcast, please visit jaclynsteeleinternational.com/selfdiscoverypod. Okay, so I have never done this type of podcast before. I wrote a script for this podcast. I have a template for it, which I do for most of my podcasts because I don't want to just get on here and ramble and not bring immense value because your time is valuable, and I don't want to waste it. But with this episode in particular, and I'm going to try out this format, I wanted to be so gut level, stream of consciousness honest that I felt like creating a script would do this topic a disservice and do you a disservice, because I don't want to beat around the bush here. And in fact, if you're watching the video recording of this podcast, you'll see my hair is wet. I did a get ready with me video this morning where for the first time ever, I show myself with no makeup on the internet, no filter, no nothing. And the reason that I did this, and I wasn't planning on really doing any of this, but as I got into the shower this morning and I was thinking about perfectionism, I thought, how can I show up on camera, or even just the idea of me showing up with my voice, for those of you that are listening, all dolled up and ready to go, when that's not real life. I don't always get dolled up. I don't always have my shit together. I don't always have things organized and looking clean and pristine, including myself. And so the reason I filmed that get ready with me, which was really fun, and if you want to see more stuff like that, let me know, because I'll film more of it. But it was because I wanted you to know that I don't want there to be any facade or curtain between us. I want there to be, and this feels wild and dangerous, but I want there to be such a level of communication and honesty that I get to be my truest self. And I think the reason that I bring that up is because perfectionism for my whole life has been an insidious and poisonous thing. I have allowed it to hold me back. I have allowed it to completely thwart me from ever starting. I have allowed it to make me feel little and small and unworthy. And I've allowed it to derail so many micro dreams that I've had for my life on the way to my macro dream, which is the dream that I have for my life overall. And when I think about perfectionism, I have to admit that if I keep giving into it and allowing it to have a role in my decision making, then I'll always be playing small. And being small and playing small are not part of the vision that I have for my life or the way that I see myself. So I just don't want to do it anymore. And I can't do it anymore. You know, my health has suffered, and I haven't talked a lot about this publicly. I did talk about giving up coffee, but here's the reality. I have, because of my perfectionism, allowed anxiety to become a part of my everyday life. And the reason anxiety is there, beyond, your everyday anxieties that make a lot of sense in a world that is somewhat volatile right now, is because I care so much about so much. And what I mean by that is I try to be the best at everything. Everything, even in the way that I care for my dogs. I'm like, I need to brush their teeth every day because when I go to the vet, I want them to say, hey, you do a really good job of taking care of your pets. I remember my husband used to poke fun at me because I told him once that I would love to be pulled over for being a good citizen and respecting the streets and respecting speed limits and all of that stuff. And he thought it was so hilarious. But the problem with all of that is my perfectionism is directly tied to self-worth. And so all of these years that I have been working my ass off and proving or trying to prove myself, it's because I haven't felt worthy. I have had low self-worth and low self-belief. And I'm so glad that this is the episode that's following up episode 10, which is on what believing in yourself really feels like, because I think at 33, I'm just kind of figuring some of this stuff out because perfectionism has blinded me. It has totally blinded me. It has come in the form of high standards. I used to say, well, I'm committed to excellence in everything that I do. And on the outside, that sounds really good. And I do have high standards for all the work that I put out. But the problem is I would use that as an excuse to hold me back or to not do something, because if it couldn't be perfect, if it couldn't be at this super duper high level, then I just wouldn't allow it to happen. And that has held me back from my dreams and pursuing the life that I've envisioned for myself. Perfectionism has shown up in the form of fear, in the form of shame, in the form of low self-worth. And I can't continue to live like this. And so that's why I'm showing up today, just kind of stripped back and scaled back and without a script, because I want you to know that I don't have everything figured out. This journey of self-discovery for me and sharing all of these episodes is absolutely because I want to add value to your life and because I genuinely care about you. But it's also because I'm trying to figure this stuff out myself so that I can continue to grow and expand and stop fucking shrinking. And I feel like my pattern will be grow, 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 shrink, shrink, grow, 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 shrink, shrink. Even in February, that's when I launched this podcast. I released 8 episodes in February and I did 23 different videos on YouTube. And at the end of the month, I felt incredible. I was so proud of myself for completing what I set out to do. And then I got a notification from Buzzsprout, which is the distributing platform for my podcast. It takes my podcast and then puts it out to iTunes and Spotify and Stitcher and all of the different places that podcasts are available. And I got this email that said, you have 500 downloads. And I was flabbergasted. I was like, I've never started a podcast before. How on earth do I have 500 downloads? This is incredible. And for some of you, 500 downloads may seem like nothing. But for me, as somebody who's never done this before, I thought it was amazing. And then Not immediately, but a day or two after, I felt my perfectionism creeping in and going, you better up-level your podcast. You better tighten things up. You better get those scripts worked out, and you better do some more memorization so when you're filming your podcast, it doesn't look like you're reading it. And then it made me not want to record the podcast at all, which is what perfectionism does, is because I'll get into my head and I'll swirl and swirl and swirl until I start to spiral out of control. But here's the deal. When I can separate myself from my own perfectionism, creating this podcast, recording videos brings me so much joy, and I have so much fun doing it when I can let go of trying to be perfect. I feel like life, when you study the arc of people who have lived well, who have the kind of lives that so many of us look up to, you realize that their stories are a series of failures and losses and successes. It's never all one thing. But in order for them to have that kind of beautiful, wild, exhilarating, exciting, successful life, they had to start somewhere. And if I'm perfectly honest with you, I've never allowed myself to be a beginner. Even when I was 4 years old, 3 years old maybe, my dad affectionately tells this story, but I feel like it's so indicative of my personality and never allowing myself to truly be a beginner. He took me to play tennis, and he gave me a little racket, and he said, okay, Jackie, I'm going to teach you how to play tennis. And I looked at him in the eyes with my racket in my hand, and I said, I already know how to play. So even at 3 or 4 years old, I had this intrinsic need to already know how to do everything because I felt vulnerable being a beginner. And again, with perfectionism too, I wanted to prove my worth. I think of another story, and this one has been on and off throughout most of my life. It's with music and instruments. I started playing the guitar when I was 15 or 16, and I took lessons, and I had several different guitar teachers, and the reason I had several different guitar teachers is because I quit over and over again. And the reason I quit over and over again wasn't because I don't love music. I do. If you look on iTunes and on YouTube, you'll see just how much I love music. But it was because I wasn't willing to be a beginner. I was terrified of making mistakes. I thought I had to have everything perfect the first time. And instead of allowing myself to progress at a natural pace, as people do when they pick up a new skill, I gave myself this standard of having to be a savant, of like, well, Mozart wrote his first symphony at 4 years old, so I'm 16, I'm 12 years behind already. And that kind of thought paradigm has led so much of my life, and it's been totally toxic. And I've done the same thing with piano. I think my first piano lesson was when I was 10, 11, 12 years old. And my aunt, who is a concert pianist and has played at Carnegie Hall and was trained in Vienna, was my piano teacher. And when I first started, she said, you know, you really have a gift for music. And then I freaked out. I was like, if I have a gift for music, then I have to be perfect. And if I'm not perfect, then I'm never going to be good enough. And if I'm never going to be good enough, then I can't make music and do what I want to do and what I feel in my soul I was created to do. And so hopefully these stories are illustrating how hard I have been on myself and how these web of really toxic and, is this the right word, deconstructive thoughts have pervaded my life in a way that now I just want to completely separate from because it's so unhealthy. And the thing is if I look beyond myself, the people and the things that I'm most attracted to are imperfect. Like, I love a piece of artwork that has something wrong with it. I love a house that's quirky. I love animals that have things that look odd and weird about them. I like outfits that don't look too put together. I like makeup looks that don't look over the top. I like pretty much everything that looks... I like things to feel real and to look real and to look like somebody lives there or wears that item. There's something comforting to me about that. Yet, when it comes to me and the way that I treat myself, I'm constantly trying to reach perfection, which is an impossible thing to ever reach because nobody is perfect. And when I dive deeper too, I'm thinking about this now as I'm saying it, I feel like perfect is boring. Can you imagine sitting down and reading a novel where the heroine doesn't experience any failure or any kind of difficulty? That would be the most boring book in the world. Or a movie where the primary character sets their eyes on a goal and doesn't experience any kind of roadblock or tumultuous experience along the way. That movie wouldn't even hit the theaters. It wouldn't hit Netflix. It'd be too boring. That's not real life. Real life is messy and it's brutal and it's beautiful and it's worth living and it's also worth mourning. It's all of these feelings. And if we try and bottle them up and put them in a facade that appears perfect to the world, we're not only being dishonest with the world, which is not something that I'm a fan of. I think we should be honest. We're also being dishonest with ourselves, which causes a total disconnect between our hearts and our minds and our souls. And that disconnect causes so much angst in our lives, whether we understand it or not. Which brings me back to the beginning of this month when I realized after finishing all of the stuff that I did in February that I was done and now I had to kind of recreate a new schedule, and I crashed. The last week of February, I had all of those podcasts, all of the videos, and 4 different clients for my business. And so I had just been going. And then I was reading this book about hormone health and fertility. You know, at some point I do want to have children. And in the book, it started talking about how some signs of hormone imbalances. And I related to some of the signs, which as a perfectionist, I was like, I'm not perfect. I haven't been doing this right or this right or this right. So of course, shame spiral. And I decided to give up coffee because all of that stimulation and those stimulants running through your bloodstream can cause hormone imbalances. And if I want to get my hormones balanced out so that I feel my best, it seemed like giving up coffee was a really good step. And so I gave up coffee. It was really hard the first few days, and I'll do a video on this. And then it got easier. And then all of a sudden I hit this wall where I was waking up at 5:30 in the morning, which is when I wake up, and then crashing by like 6:30 a.m., where I would fall back asleep after meditating and reading and wake up feeling like, I don't know that I can continue on today because I am so tired and exhausted. And I am not a medical doctor. I haven't been diagnosed with this, but I think what happened was giving up coffee and replacing it with this really healthy tea called chicory root that feeds your gut bacteria. It started to cause a detox in my body, and my body was screaming for rest. Yet I still had this voice in my head, like, you just got to push through it, Jaclyn. You got to keep going. You got to keep doing what you say you're going to do and show up and put the podcast out and show up on Instagram stories and be there for your clients and be there for your husband and all the people in your life, even when your body is screaming at you to stop. And that's why I say perfectionism creates this disconnect between our hearts and our minds and our souls. It's because it confuses us into thinking we need to be something else or someone else from who we already are. And that's not okay. So fuck perfectionism and all of the toxic byproducts and side effects of it. I don't want any part. And I know that perfectionism, because I've been living with it for 33 years, is not something that I can just take off like a winter coat. But I want to actively deconstruct it and extract it from my life, because I can't let it continue to make my decisions or stop me or make me feel like I need to be small. I was created to be big and to do big things. And you, my friend, were created to be big and to do big things. And perfectionism and shame and fear and all of these things that we allow to hold us back, we have to figure out how to deconstruct them and move past them. And so that is what I am committing to do. That's what I deserve to commit to do. And that's what you deserve to commit to do. You know, one of my words this year, and I'm just feeling so teary right now, but one of my words this year is lighten. And for those of you that know me in real life, I feel like I come off as pretty bubbly and happy. And for so long, that has been me showing up in the world the way that I feel like I have to show up in order not to make other people uncomfortable. And so for years, I have been pressuring myself to fit into this box of happy, bubbly, encouraging light. And while I feel like that is my soul in there, this human experience has been so hard in so many ways for me. And that perfectionism has been so pervasive that I've isolated and I've become in a lot of ways. And I feel like over the last year, I've gotten so much better at this. So I don't want you to think I'm in a deep, dark hole right now, because I'm not. I'm really, really not. But one of my words, going back to that, is lighten. And it's because I've been so hard on myself, and there's been such a disconnect between what I'm feeling and what I show people I'm feeling. And I want to get to a point where I lighten up in the way that I speak to myself, in the way that I treat myself, in the way that I allow myself to be out in the world. I don't have to be happy, bubbly all the time. You don't have to be happy, bubbly all the time. We don't need to be Debbie Downer either, but we can be somewhere in between and let that be okay. So I want to lighten my mindset and the way that I treat myself and the way that I go about moving in the world. And I also want to ease up in my approach to everything. It's good to have high standards, but when those high standards become something that has the ability to freeze you in your tracks and in your life and make you feel small, those high standards aren't appropriate. And so I want to ease in to the things that I'm doing in this world. I don't want to try and make this podcast perfect because I'm human and humans are imperfect. I don't want to try and make everything about my videos perfect because I'm human and the way that I edit is imperfect and the way that I show up in the world is imperfect. I don't want to try and whip my body into submission anymore because I'm 5'3" and I'm never going to be 6 feet tall and waif-like and skinny. I'm always going to be 5'3" with some curves. It's just the way that my body is built. So I don't want to try and whip myself into being something that is not appropriate or healthy for my life. And speaking of perfectionism and the body, before I wrap this up, when I was in high school and my parents were going through a divorce, and I touched on this in episode 1 or 2 of this podcast, but I felt as my parents were going through this divorce and all of the cultural norms and expectations of being a young teenage girl, which so many of you I know can relate to, I felt out of control in every area of my life except for what I was eating. And so I became severely anorexic to the point where I could see all of my ribs. I had horrible acne, and I stopped getting my period for an entire year. Oh, I'm so grateful that my hair didn't fall out, but I'm sure that was the next step. But I would restrict everything that I ate. If I had bread, I wouldn't have any butter on it. If I had lunch, it would be dry tuna and a rice cake. If I had like a treat, it would be one tiny square of chocolate. And I lived this way for over a year. And I share that because perfectionism isn't just something that people struggle with that makes them have high standards. It's something that bleeds into all the areas of your life and causes so much discomfort and disconnect. And so, again, I know I'm repeating myself here, but we owe it to ourselves to heal from this. I don't know exactly what that looks like, healing from perfectionism, because I'm just living my life and figuring it out as I go and seeking help as I need it. But we owe it to ourselves to heal. We don't need to carry this anymore. We don't need to show up as anyone other than who we already are. Because man, just the fact that we're here is a miracle. The fact that your mom and your dad got together and created you is a miracle. You're here, you're living, you're breathing, you're walking, you're touching, you're loving. Life is a miracle. And to allow perfectionism to be this dark, heavy black cloud that we just kind of drag around with us everywhere sucks. And it sucks the joy out of life. So let's not do it anymore. Let's enjoy. Let's approach things with childlike curiosity. Let's ease up. Let's lighten up. Can you imagine going through your day and just allowing yourself to enjoy being alive? I mean, I have moments of that for sure. But I don't know that I ever have a full day that goes by where I'm like, oh man, I was just in the flow the entire day. I have to consistently remind myself. So maybe that's part of it. Maybe we just need to consistently remind ourselves that we don't need to be perfect, that perfect doesn't exist, that perfect is boring, that perfect isn't cool. Perfect isn't fucking cool. Nobody wants to go online and consistently interact with somebody's perfect content. It's boring and it's not real because that's not real life. We're allowed to be beginners. We're allowed not to know everything. We're allowed to figure it out as we go. I mean, that's what we're all doing anyway on this planet. Nobody has it all figured out. So let's take a deep breath and allow ourselves to be, to work hard, but to rest, to love ourselves unconditionally, but also to know when maybe we need to make a change, to open our hearts in ways that feel vulnerable and scary because it's what makes us alive. Let's live. Let's do this thing. Let's stop holding ourselves back through perfectionism, through fear, through shame. You have been listening to Self-Discovery with me, Jaclyn Steele. I'm so glad that you are here. If you want to know more about me, please visit jaclynsteeleinternational.com. If you want to connect online, please find me on Instagram at Jaclyn Steele. And if you want to view some more videos, please visit youtube.com/official Jaclyn Steele. You were not meant to be little, my beautiful, beautiful, gorgeous listener. You were not meant to be little. So go be big today. I wish you light and love and peace. And until next time, thank you for listening.